You know, one of my all-time favorite kids movies is called The Emperor's New Groove. And if you've seen it, then you know that it's a movie about a spoiled, entitled emperor named Cusco and how he accidentally gets turned into a llama and abandoned in the woods where he learns how to be a better person. Okay, but how does someone get accidentally turned into a llama? I'm glad you asked. See, it happened because the henchman in the movie didn't listen properly to the instructions of the evil villain. Like, she wanted him to get a potion that would kill Cusco, but the henchman instead got a potion that turned him into a llama. And so his failure to listen led to an insanely bizarre set of consequences. Now look, maybe the stakes aren't that high in your life, but not listening closely to what others tell us to do does end up creating consequences that will cost us big time. Like, when your parents say to clean your room and to make sure your laundry gets put away in the process, right? But you forget that they ever said anything about laundry because you didn't listen, it can affect your relationship with your parents. Now, that type of stuff over time produces feelings of anger and frustration, and it leads to hurtful conversations. That's just one example of how not paying attention can lead to pain. So, for those of us who have grown up in church, right? Have you been paying attention to what God has to say about your life? Like, do you really know, or do you just think you know? Today we're talking about anxiety, and anxiety is a condition of the heart where we give in to stress and worry about things that mostly haven't happened yet. And this can lead to all sorts of destructive behavior if we let it. Anxiety over getting bad grades can lead us to work ourselves to death or even to cheat. Anxiety over dating relationships can lead us to make compromises and get in an unhealthy relationship just because we want a boyfriend or a girlfriend that badly. Anxiety over social situations can lead us to shut down and isolate ourselves. I mean, these are just a few. The truth of the matter is, this generation of teenagers has the highest rate of anxiety ever. Period. And that's not something I say to shame Gen Z. It's not me standing up here bragging about how my generation is better. Like, it's really not. I'm a millennial. You know how sick millennials are of having older generations criticize us? I'm not gonna do that to another group of people. So this really isn't about that. You know, it's just every generation seems to have common struggles, and anxiety is the big one for yours. That's just where we're at. So since anxiety is so common right now, it probably makes some sense for us to try to work through how to navigate that particular feeling better. So where does anxiety come from? How does it take over when we don't want it to? And what needs to happen in order for us to gain a better handle on it? We're in a series on feelings right now, looking at what it means to follow Jesus and see our feelings through the lens of the gospel. So how does the gospel say we should view our anxiety? Hopefully, seeing through G-Shades is going to help us navigate our feelings better when it comes to this particular emotion. Let's jump in. Back in the day, Jesus liked to teach parables. Now, a parable is a story that is meant to teach a lesson by comparing the characters and the details in the story to real-life people and things. One day, Matthew recorded a parable that Jesus told about a farmer, and the story went something like this. A farmer decided to plant some seeds one day. And back in those days, farmers would just throw their seeds on the ground, and if the ground was good enough for the seeds to grow, then they would grow. And if not, too bad. Wow, that seems wasteful. No, it's fine because the seeds that didn't grow would just get swooped up by pigeons or pterodactyls. Man, there were no pterodactyls in Jesus' day. Hey, you don't know that. You weren't there. The seeds were all good, but sometimes the dirt wasn't. In the story Jesus told, one handful of seeds landed on rocky soil, another handful of seeds landed on thorns and weeds, and the final handful of seeds landed on good, squishy, fertile soil. And as you might imagine, the seeds that fell on the rocky soil didn't make it. And the seeds that fell on the thorns and weeds grew a little bit, but the plants eventually were choked out by weeds and thorns. But of course, the seeds that fell on the good soil grew and became healthy, beautiful plants. So Jesus told that story, and then he went back and explained how each place that the seed fell actually correlates to our faith. The seeds are the message of the gospel, and the different patches of soil represent each of us. Eventually, he got around to explaining how the thorns relate to belief in the gospel. And here's what Matthew recorded in Matthew 13:22. Now the one sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the worries of this age and the seduction of wealth choke the word and it becomes unfruitful. And Jesus is saying something huge right here. He's telling us that it's possible to hear the good news of the gospel, live like we understand it, and then get distracted by anxiety so much that we give it up and walk away, never having really accepted it in the first place. So what does this mean? It means that anxiety can be powerful. Not only can it affect our body, the panic attacks and the shaking and the sleeplessness, but it can actually affect our spirit. Anxiety is the power to choke out your faith before it ever really takes root and becomes strong enough to stand on its own. And really, what this comes down to is trust. You were created to be able to trust God, and Satan uses every tool at his disposal to convince you not to. One of the enemy's greatest strategies to keep you from finding joy and peace in Christ is to fill you with anxiety. And the sneaky part is the enemy doesn't have to convince you that God isn't real. He just has to convince you that God isn't good. Say that one more time. The enemy doesn't have to convince you that God isn't real. He just has to convince you that God isn't good. And while I don't want to give the enemy too much praise, that strategy is pretty brilliant. I mean, think about it. In Christian circles, we call the gospel the good news for a reason. I'm talking about the news that the God of the universe, who created us to live our best lives when we're in tune with him, saw that we had ruined our chance to live in tune with him. So he came down and sacrificed everything so that we could live in tune with him. I mean, that's not just good news. That's the best news. It's the central part of our faith. It is the core message of Christianity, and we call it good news. So Satan doesn't need to convince you that the gospel isn't true. He just needs to convince you that the good news isn't good enough. He just needs to convince you that while Jesus can and did take care of your soul, he can't and won't take care of your social life. While Jesus can and did show his great love for you by taking on the punishment that you deserved, he can't and won't show up for you in your school life. While you can trust Jesus and his plan for your eternity, you can't trust his plan for your present. Satan doesn't need you to believe the good news isn't true. He just needs you to believe that while God has secured your eternity, he isn't present in your present. And anxiety is one of the big tools that the enemy uses to do that. Listen to me. It's so important that you hear this. If you are in the room and you struggle with anxiety, I am not condemning you. If you're in the room and you take meds to help deal with it, I'm not telling you to throw your meds in the trash can. You are not a bad person because you struggle with anxiety. And I'm so thankful that God has provided the gifts of modern medicine and therapy so we can rebalance the chemicals in our brain that need to be rebalanced. But hear this, anxiety is also a spiritual issue. The enemy would have you believe that God is not trustworthy and that the good news is not good enough. And it's his hope that eventually he can whisper those things to you enough to choke out your faith before it ever really develops strong roots. But when you see anxiety through the lens of the gospel, you won't believe the enemy's lies. When you keep your eyes on the fact that the gospel is good news for your present and not just your eternity, you'll be better equipped to fend off anxiety when it shows up. When the weeds and the thorns of worry tell you that you'll always be alone, or that you'll never get into college, or that no one can ever really like you as a person, you can choose to reject those lies from the enemy and remember that God is present in your present. That's why the good news is so good. Here's the point. When you see emotions through the lens of the gospel, anxiety won't choke out your faith. Anxiety is very real. And the enemy is very smart. But because of what Jesus did on the cross, you have the God of the universe living within you. So what if in a moment where anxiety threatened to take control, you took a step back and remembered just how good the good news is? What would that look like? What effect would it have on your life if you were as calm and optimistic about next week as you are about your place in eternity someday? Whenever those feelings of worry and panic rise up, you're faced with a choice. You can listen to your feelings and be just like all the other anxious and fearful people in the world, or you can listen to your Father and experience not just eternal life, but life at its fullest right here, right now, moment by moment. Anxiety is real, the enemy is smart, but God is present in your present.